Hi everyone and welcome. Today I have a little bit of a less exciting video to talk about, at least for me, because I have a pile of 6 books next to me that I've bought a long while ago and I'm just no longer excited to read them anymore. Now, you might think that this is because my reading tastes have changed along the years, but I don't think that that's true. I think that I just know my own reading taste better and I don't take risks if I buy new books. I know what I like and that's what I'm going to buy. A lot of these books stem from a time that I was new to booktube, especially as a viewer. So if booktube was raving about a book and it was a fantasy book, I was just going to buy it. While now I know that I don't like all fantasy subgenres. So even if a booktuber that I really like is raving about a book, if they use certain buzzwords that are positive for them, they might be negative for me and I will not buy that book. So yes, I definitely changed along the years and I do think that I know my own reading taste better. Please let me know if you're the same, if your reading taste is pretty stable but you just know better what you like, and if you also had that phase when you were new to booktube that you just bought a lot of things that you saw booktubers talking about. I want to know if I'm not the only one. But still, only 6 books on this list. It could have been worse. And the first book that I have here is probably one that a lot of people are going to be very sad about that it's made it on the list, because this is definitely a booktube favorite, and that is Jade City by Van Ali. Now, this also stems from a time that I bought entire series because I was very afraid that the hardbacks were going to run out and then I would have a mismatched series, and that was the worst thing in the world, while now I don't really mind that much. So I also have Jade War. Jade Legacy, I think, wasn't out at the time, so I just have the first 2 in the series. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not going to read this. Actually, all the books on this list I might read one day, because I very rarely unhaul a book that I've bought myself without even giving it a try. So all of these at least will be given a chance to prove themselves. But I just have a feeling that this might be a 3-star at best, because a lot of people told me that this is like The Godfather, but then in an Asian setting. And I love The Godfather movies, so I thought, well, that would probably mean that I love The Godfather-like books as well. But now I've come to the realization that this is going to be very action-packed. I've also heard from a couple of people that they couldn't really connect to the characters. And these are actually 2 things that I don't really like. I don't like action-packed books. I like slower reads, and I do like to have a connection to the characters. So I think that if I pick this up, this will be a 3-star read at most. So I'm just not really looking forward to giving this series a try. But I will at some point, because everybody's raving about it and I want to know what the fuss is about. Next up, a book that I think the premise sounds very interesting, but knowing my reading tastes better and seeing just some tendencies in books that I don't like, I'm not so sure if I'm actually going to love this one. And that is Legacy of Ash by Matthew Ward. This is the first one in the Legacy Trilogy, if I'm not mistaken. This is, first of all, a very thick book. It is almost 800 pages. First book, I don't hear a lot of people talking about this book. I do know that there are some smaller booktubers, especially, who have read this one and quite enjoyed it. But unfortunately, most of the time, my reading tastes don't really align with them, so that's not really a good sign. Now, at the back here, you have Game of Thrones meet The Last Kingdom. This is definitely a pet peeve of mine. These are the 2 most well-known shows, I think, at this time that are historical fiction / fantasy. So to just put that on the blurber for your book, it feels very generic to me, and I don't really trust that, especially if they compare books to Game of Thrones. Now, this premise sounds still very interesting. That you have the fall of an empire, and now you have different royal families, I think, of families of nobility who are warring for the throne, so you have a lot of political intrigue, you have some fights also happening, I think war, the sharper words and sharper knives, blinded by ambition. So all of this sounds very interesting. The thing is, in this entire premise, not one name of a character is mentioned. So I do think that this means that this is very plot-driven. I've also heard that there's a lot of action, that it's very fast-paced. So all of that is, again, something that I usually don't enjoy. And then when I look at the different chapters, these are just titled 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't really mind that. I don't have an issue with that. I don't need chapter titles. But I thought that maybe because they said, like Game of Thrones, that this was going to have different POVs, and then each of the chapters was going to switch between the POVs, but then usually the chapter titles are the POVs names. So I don't know what this is, and that's why I don't really have any expectations even. But again, I think that at most this would probably be a 3-star read, and for an 800-page book, that's not the best prediction probably. Then a type of book that I think I will just not really like, and that is The Mythic Dream by a bunch of authors, because this is a short story collection. Now, this has a story connected to it. So I bought this a little bit over a year ago when Brexit happened. And because of this book depository, which was at that time the site where I bought most of my books, I couldn't really access and I couldn't buy books from them. So I was in a little bit of a panic. I thought that this was going to last forever and I wasn't going to get my hands on English titles that easily anymore. So I went to a Dutch bookshop. So I live in Belgium. And I wanted to try T. Kingfisher, but they didn't have her works. They only had this bind up, and T. Kingfisher is one of the authors who has a short story in here. You also have Naomi Novik, you have Shauna McGuire, you have Anne Leckie, Rebecca Roanhorse, so definitely a lot of names that I recognize. And I thought, well, let's give it a try. I can try her short story, and then maybe I can get my hands on her own works. Now, by this time, I have already got my hands on one of her own works, The Raven and Reindeer, and I absolutely loved that. And I have come to the conclusion that I just don't like short stories. It's something that I wish I could get into because it sounds so fun, reading a short story every night or every weekend, something like that, and slowly making your way through this book. And it also seems a low commitment because a short story, it's only 30 pages, maybe even less, so why not? But I just don't like it. I think that novellas is the farthest that I can go, and even novellas are a hit and miss. Sometimes I wish that they would have expanded it into a novel, but for most of the time I can really appreciate a novella for what it is. However, a short story is just not enough time for me to get invested. By the time that I'm invested in the story, it's usually over and it's too superficial for me to enjoy. I've tried some other ones and they always fall flat for me. I never really love them. And even though it seems like low commitment, this is still a 300 plus page book. So I would rather read a full-length novel in that time, which is really a shame because this is about dreams of myths. Yeah, these are dreams of classic myths, reimaginings of stories, stuff like that. So I would have loved it, probably, if it were just full-length novels or a novella even. So again, this is one that I will hopefully try in the summer because I really want to get into this of reading a short story every evening, and especially when I have a long holiday coming up, that's something that I might give a try and maybe even vlog. But I just know that I'm not going to love these because it's not enough time to get me invested. Now, the next one is actually one that is quite similar to that Legacy of Ash book, and that is The Thousand Deaths of Arthur Ben by Tyler Whitesides. Again, this is a very thick book. This is also one where I actually have the entire trilogy. Maybe you can see it somewhere behind me. No, it's a little bit too high. But this, I never hear anybody talking about this, but I have seen some comparisons to The Lies of Locke Lamora. Now, I DNF'd The Lies of Locke Lamora. This is a heist story, so maybe that's the only connection that there is, and that's why they compare it. And if that's the case, I'm still quite hopeful. But this is a humongous book. It is, oh, it's not that. It's 700 plus pages, so it's big, but I thought that it was going to be a little bit bigger. And if I'm not mistaken, we have a master thief here, and he gets requested to steal something that's very extraordinary, I think. And then they realize that even though he was just contracted to steal that one little thing, it has a very big impact on civilization. Now, I bought this one when I just read The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. And so I was looking for other heist stories. I came across this one. But since I've heard that it's very action-packed, and since I've heard the comparison of The Lies of Locke Lamora, and because I never hear anybody talking about this trilogy, again, my expectations are just not that high. And I think that at this point, if I didn't have it, I would never buy it, let alone buy the entire trilogy. I would probably just try it on an ebook and see if I like it, try the first couple of chapters, but it wouldn't be high on my TBR list, it wouldn't be high on my wish list, because, yeah, what I do know about it doesn't really sound like I will absolutely love this. And then we have the Lycaenous Trilogy. Yes, you can say the entire trilogy because, again, this stems from a time that I bought the entire series, so I do have the entire trilogy in trade paperback. This is the first book, The Shadow of What Was Lost, and of course this is written by James Islington. Now, I think that this was first self-published and then was picked up traditionally by Orbit. I'm not quite sure if that's true, but I often hear the comparison to The Wheel of Time. If you don't know, I DNF'd The Wheel of Time. I didn't like that one. And I think that especially Patrick said, this is like The Wheel of Time, but without all of the bits that you don't like, without all of the tedious bits. And this is just that story, but comprised into a trilogy. So that sounded awesome. Now, since then, I've seen a couple of reviews telling me that especially the writing style is subpar. It's not that good. And that's something that I am extremely annoyed by if that happens. That's something that I just can't forgive. I can forgive a lot of things in a book and keep reading, but if the writing style is just clunky and it feels like it doesn't really flow nicely, that's something that pulls me out of the story, especially if it's with the dialogue, and that's what I've heard here a couple of times as well. I have also heard that the first book is the best and that it goes a little bit downhill from then, so definitely not a good sign. And this might not be fair, but I've seen a lot of people who absolutely adore The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne love this trilogy. And if you don't know, I DNF'd The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. It's just not my type of read. Again, it was a 3-star probably at best if I would have finished the trilogy, and that's just not enough for me to continue going. So that makes me think that this might be something similar, because with John Gwynne, also the writing style was one of my biggest issues. So yeah, I don't know why I bought the entire trilogy, and at this point, because my expectations are not that high, I also don't know when I will get to this, because these are 3 very chunky books. Like, this is again a 650-page book. I think that the second and third one are at least the same length. So that's a big commitment for a series that everything that I do know about it, the tidbits that I do know, don't really sound that positive. And then we have the last book. This is actually my most recent purchase. I think that I bought this in October, and that is The Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Now again, this has a story attached to it. In October, as you know, most booktubers bring out their dark academia vlogs or dark academia predictions that they will love, or dark academia recommendations, all of that. And I love that. I watch that throughout the entire month of October. And one that often gets recommended is, of course, Ninth House. Now, Leigh Bardugo is an author that I wanted to try for a long time. She often writes YA. This is one of her first adult books, I think. So I just wanted to give it a try. I don't like university stories. If they're set in medieval times, that's fine. But like modern university set stories, that's something that I don't like. Without getting into spoilers, but there are some books, one book, that I absolutely love from last year. But my most negative idea or feeling about it was that we have a part in a modern university setting, and I just don't like that. So that gives me the same feeling here. Why did I pick this one up? This is the only dark academia that I know that has some fantasy elements, so that's why I picked this one. But I don't like modern day set fantasy. So this was, again, BookTube made me do it. And I do know that around October, I will probably pick this one up, because I will be excited again, and I will be in that mood again of seeing everybody talk about dark academia. But now, when I'm out of that setting, I do know that, again, this might be 2.5, 3 stars at most, because it's just not what I usually like. There's a reason that I've never tried dark academia before, because it doesn't really appeal to me. This one, I don't know anything other than that it's set in Yale, and I think that there's murder, or at least some dark forces are there, and we are following one of the students in Yale. That doesn't sound interesting to me, so I don't know why I picked it up, and this is definitely a mistake that I cannot really forgive myself for, because this happened recently. I already knew my reading tastes at that point, and I shouldn't have fell into that trick of wanting to be on the hype with BookTube. But like I said, I will try it in October, and then we will see. So these are the 6 and a little bit more, if you count the fact that I have entire series on the list, books that I'm not really that excited for. Like I said, I will probably give all of these a try sooner or later, but at this point, these are my 3-star predictions, you could say, at best, and that's if I'm being quite positive. Please let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these, and if you do think that I'm wrong and that I will love them, because I could definitely use that advice, or if you think, yeah, just toss that one aside, because you probably will dislike it, or at least at the very best be like, fine, which is not what we're looking for if we're picking up a new book. As always, I hope that you enjoyed the video, and see you next time. Bye!